Okay, I think Max, you have to unmute too.
Hello everyone. Yeah, my name is Matt. Actually, my Korean name is Sangyup. I'm in Seoul now. I appreciate the opportunity to share my experience and what we have done in Korea. Actually, I am working for Sopoong now. The Sopoong is an impact investing company based in Seoul, and which provide pre-seed round investment and accelerating for early stage social ventures, usually in Korea. So you guys just think we are an impact accelerator in Korea. I know many of you are not familiar with our name, as we have just focused on Korea mostly. Even our full name is very long, though. Actually, the Sopoong means picnic in Korea, but it's an abbreviation of social power of networked group. So our long name shows our philosophy that social problems can be solved by not by one organization or one single person, but by a network and organized groups or people. So last 11 years, we have been investing over 70 social ventures and help them to create a total market of about $1 billion in Korea. So today, yeah, let's. I hope we're gonna have a fruitful and meaningful discussion. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Max. Maybe next we could have Russ New from Quest Ventures.
Hello everyone, I'm Russ, and thanks so much for dialing in today. And Quest, I'm based in Singapore, and Quest is a fund that looks into the in-tech digital space startups and early stage startups. So some of our portfolio, if you're familiar, include Carousel, Shopbag, Shopbag, and then 99.co. These are more primarily Singapore and Indonesia focused. So we have also, I would think, a strong presence in Vietnam, specifically Ho Chi Minh. And for example, WeCare is one of the startups that currently we are looking to work with, right? And so specifically, I'm a venture partner, and I look into the impact investment side and the impact initiative. So meaning to say, one of the key things that we look at is how digital technology can be used as a form of solution, right? So a lot of our projects are startups that we've invested in, focus on using digital tech to scale and to help the community. Nonetheless, we also aim to look at other kinds of technology-based startups, right? So this is one of the key areas that we look into. So hope to be able to be connected with all of you and see our area of collaboration. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Russ. And last but not least, we have Dr. Faiz. Doctor, I think you need to unmute also.
Well, I'm Faiz, as we said, and I work for the Asian Institute of Technology, which is a university in Bangkok, Thailand, where I live. For the last 10 years or so, I've been associated with Professor Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate who's famous for microfinance and social business. 8 of those 10 years, I've been head of the Yunus Center here at AIT, and since about last year, I've also taken on responsibilities for the SDG lab at AIT, Yunus Center. The Yunus Center basically identifies social problems and tries to build businesses or business solutions around those social problems. So whether it's technology or whether it's grassroots or whether it's hybrid, we work with entrepreneurs to build business cases for solving social problems. In Dhaka, where we're headquartered, every month our aim is to empower almost 1,000 young people with business ideas who can then go out and create grassroots businesses. Some of them are technology businesses, but a lot of them are not. And we'll talk a little bit more about that perhaps in the panel. But our thrust in Thailand has been to build a corporate action tank where large companies will work with local communities to build local enterprises that help solve unemployment, poverty, and certain high demand problem-solving businesses.
All right, thank you, Dr. Faiz. So we do, as you can see, we do have a very diverse panel right here, from serial entrepreneurs, investors, to education institution, academists. So, and I was just thinking to myself that this forum could not have come at a more urgent time. And all of us know that the pandemic is still looming in the air. And I am actually, in fact, deep inside it because I'm in the United States, in Oakland, California. So it's not just the pandemic, but people are actually taking to the streets and rallying for racial inclusivity. Something I guess is very close to the theme of this time's conference. So we sense, I think, the ground is shaking beneath us. There is some kind of change in the air. We are not so sure whether, this is going to be a new norm, or we're going to go back to a different norm, or maybe there's a chance for us to even reinvent a different kind of normal, right? So one thing I think maybe is certain with this pandemic is that it is actually revealing cracks in the system. But I also like to think of cracks as a way of letting light in. So maybe, we are very lucky here because we have such diversity and we can do a bit of international sense making. So my first question would be to the panel: what cracks do you start to see in the system, especially in your local communities, or even you can give a global perspective too?
Maybe I jump in first. Is it okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So hi everyone, Russ here again. And Singapore is a very small country. It's with about 5.5 million people, of whom about 2 million are either expats from other countries or migrant workers, right? So meaning to say we have, out of the 5.5, probably around 3.5 are local Singaporeans, the rest are not. And during this pandemic, I think one of the key things that has been flagged out is, despite our early intervention, currently our numbers of infected stand at about 36,000 people who have been infected with COVID. Right? 36, that's a huge number, right, considering Singapore's size. However, the mortality rate, people who have died from it, are less than 40. So if you look at it, it's less than 0.1%, right? So what is the crack then? I think the crack is with the migrant workers. So a lot of the 36,000, I think more than 95% come from the migrant workers. So the workers who have come from other countries, specifically India and Bangladesh, who form, I would like to think, the jobs that probably a lot of Singaporeans don't want to take part in or partake in. For example, the construction industry, right, and so on and so forth. So I always believe that we are only as strong as our weakest link, right? So imagine a dam, okay, a dam that blocks the water, and then there's a village, right, at the bottom of the dam. When there's a small crack, right, I think most people will ignore because they would think that, hey, the rest of the dam is strong, so it can block the water. But as the crack grows, maybe it's too late to patch up the dam, right? The dam, and eventually the dam may break, and everybody else, is affected. So using that analogy, right, being as weak, we're only as strong as our weakest link. I think this is one of the key things that's one of my reflection, right? That we've been neglecting the welfare of the migrant workers. They live in bad conditions. I think unintentionally, that's unfortunately, that's our resources are not used to help them. So moving forward, that is one of the key things, right? The light that comes through the crack. I think there's been a lot of reflection in the society about how we've been treating this, right? So it's more from the social economic angle, right? So instead of just pursuing economic growth, maybe it's time to relook how we should look at how we treat fellow human beings as well, right? Because if this is one of the key cases, if let's say they have been given better environment where it's not so crammed into one room, I think this whole situation will be greatly mitigated. So this is one of the key takeaways during this pandemic. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, can I? Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Yes.
As a Korean, I am also impressed with our government response to the pandemic and the high level of testing and tracking. The quick action by our government has saved many lives of many lives of Korea and our health system. However, the economic fallout is not clear, especially with losing job. As point of my view, through the epidemic we faced in an unwanted way in this year, we all know that the present and the future stand on the unstable foundation. It seems that only small number of people predicted that globalization would stop because of the epidemic. So in Korea, we are feeling that the future hidden in the midst of facing a virus called an epidemic demands a new paradigm. The Ulrich Beck, who wrote The Risky Society, said poverty is hierarchical, but smoke is equal. But the epidemic doesn't seem to be. Jobs where remote work is not possible, such as field jobs and service jobs, are becoming more at risk. The cost of buying a mask is also a burden for Korean, even in Korea. The vulnerable are more vulnerable, not only to save but also to job crisis. So ironically, the Korean government's funding to overcome disasters also accelerate the gap between the rich and poor. But we thought the funds released by the central bank will flow into the businesses, self-employed, and household in the forms of loans. But these funds must create added value. However, there is currently no such kind of flow. Now, beyond the low growth and no growth that became the new normal, the reverse growth is clear confirmed in Korea. The real economy money that needs to be turned around the consumption is high for money gains in financial market. So in Korea, the stock market hit the rate before the coronavirus. So eventually these loans, we think these loans will give a second and the third shock to another debt, and in the process, those with capital will survive, but the vulnerable people will losing their jobs, even losing their economic life in Korea. So some of entrepreneurs and some of innovators started to discuss about the future situation, but the solution is not clear still. Yeah, that is happening in Korea now.
Thank you, Max. Sounds like a really handful there that I think definitely we're going to get more into.
Right.
Yeah, Dr. Faiz?
Yes, please. Well, actually, this an echo again.
Yeah, there's an echo, probably.
Okay. I feel that in order to address your question, there's a number of vantage points, right? So we've had two very distinct and very valid points. But I must confess that there is a third perspective or infinite other perspectives which do not represent the old normal from a developed country perspective. Some of the communities we work with, their old normal is actually not very different from their new normal. We are aware of communities where we didn't have basic services, where people were not able to choose the kind of life they wanted to live, where access to capital was and is severely limited. And even if capital is available, the ability to work that capital is very poor. The structural inequities or inequalities in the system is something that people have gotten so used to that it has taken a complete sort of control over how people react to things which, say, for some of us who are lucky, is bad governance. For somebody who's always had bad governance, there's no comparator. What's a good governance argument for these guys? When people say that, social distances has sapped people of their economic incentives, but there are people we know in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Pakistan, in certain other countries in Pacific Islands, where all this discussion seems distant, and really the context is completely different. What has hurt these people is the defenselessness they feel against disease, and a disease which is rampant, highly contagious, and has very little in terms of government support systems to defend against. So I think I'd like to also put forward the new normal conversation from the perspective of people who didn't have very much in the first place, even before last November. And this is the kind of people that the Yunus network tries to work with in Haiti, in Kenya, in India. And so we find that these people have suffered less in a way because their innate resilience has been built up over the years. So you see that they're afraid of disease and disability and death like everybody else. But they're not hobbled by this realization that things don't work anymore, or my mobility is limited, or my expectation from government is changed, or the way I will interact with my employer has changed. So that's one contextual thing that I wanted to introduce to you. I have no answers to this because we're still working at a very basic level with trying to what we call engage, educate, and empower people. And for a lot of the communities that we work in, the engagement has been missing for years. The education is nowhere in sight, so let alone empowerment. So for us, the journey is for a new normal is a journey of inclusion, a journey of beneficial collaboration, and a journey of relatively selfless care for humanity. Now, those are things, and when I say this, I begin to realize that this language has now assumed a new meaning. Whereas before the pandemic, this was too touchy-feely. This was too fuzzy to talk about humane values and beneficial collaborations and so on. Because people said, no, once we've made it in life, we'll share with everybody else. But now we suddenly realize that a thing like COVID-19 happens, and all you worked for comes to a screeching halt until things go back to where you thought they would go back to. But now we find ourselves in a place where it's unlikely that we'll go back exactly to the world we knew before December 2019. So there will have to be adjustments as we go. So in a way, the crack that I see admitting light is the crack that is a realization that there are people who have had a COVID-like situation even before COVID, because of lack of opportunities, because of lack of mobility, because of lack of education, because of lack of entrepreneurial support, because of lack of technology support. And so if we begin understanding that a little bit more, I would say that the light's working. And we will probably move to a more humane realization of how the world should be run.
Wow, amazing. When I listened to the answers, my heart felt heavy, and slowly it got lifted up. I felt the whole transformation. I guess if I could summarize all three perspectives here, I would say the word compassion. And the root word of compassion, in fact, comes from com, which is together, and passion, which is actually suffer, to suffer for. So actually it's common suffering, it's to suffer together. That COVID, the pandemic itself, just reveals the cracks that has already been suffered by a lot of people. Hence, it is normal for them. It's just right now we see it starkly right in our face. And so just trading this to, these recent events to also the topic that is dear to all our hearts, because all of us, I guess, right here are taking creative capitalism as the tool for change. Hence, what do you think inclusive really means? Has it changed in this day of age? Does it have a new meaning right now? Is the circle bigger? Do we need to include even more? Right. And maybe to illustrate better, you could also give us some examples that inspire you of what you see as an example of an inclusive business. Yeah, I know that this is maybe a tough one. Anyone wants to go at it first?
If you allow me to jump in first.
Sure.
Okay. Well, inclusiveness basically again has a number of interpretations. We find that from a very hard-nosed business perspective, inclusiveness can be interpreted as having a product that is affordable, available, and usable by as many people as you can basically sell it to. Now, if you look at mobile phones, to me, and it doesn't have to be a very high-end smartphone, we now have phones that are affordable but have a lot of features that connect people digitally, which diminish the gap that has always existed between people with digital technology or without, the digital divide as we call it. So take this one example. If we interpret inclusiveness as somebody's ability to sell a product that eliminates the digital divide, I would call that an inclusive product. And so that's one interpretation of inclusiveness. What we are doing now, sitting in this wonderful group of people, is another example of a Zoom being an example of a product which has made distances matter less, which has made connectivity across huge distances relatively easier to accomplish, right? And so to me, this would be an inclusive product. And it's relatively affordable, it's relatively technically easy to use and so on. So that's one position that a lot of my friends take on inclusive businesses or interpreting inclusivity as business. But there is another more sinister side to this. And that is that when we compete for advantage in the marketplace, we do so in the old way, we do so at the cost of the competition. That is a completely different debate. And for me, that is an unresolved debate. What Simon Sinek calls responsible competitiveness is something that is worth studying. That you don't cream the competition to oblivion. You don't create all losers and one winner. That has been the traditional business model that we have learned in business school, that a lot of our young people are still constrained to work in their daily lives, because in order to win, everybody else must lose. Mm-hmm. Now, in the inclusive debate, that this other perspective that I am trying to sort of introduce to this conversation is that there are businesses where other people can win also. It doesn't mean them making all the profits or you handing off your profits to other people or you slicing up your markets and saying, okay, I won't sell here. That's also in certain categories illegal because that's cartelling, but or unfair trade practices. I'm not advocating that at all. But when you include people, I'm thinking of including people in value chains, including people in supply chains, including the vertical elements of supply chain becoming more diverse, more inclusive, more partner oriented. So if the bigger the brand grows, the bigger the market grows, the potential for creating more complex, more diverse, and more participatory supply chains and value chains also multiplies. So to me, another way of interpreting inclusiveness is making sure that you grow big. It's making sure that you succeed in business. It's making sure that you make margins and profits work for you. But at the same time, be less selfish in integrating the vertical elements and the horizontal elements of the value chain so that more people can eke out value and product related or service related products. And that is what we might call an inclusive interpretation of shared success.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I think it's brilliantly put. Very impressed with that. If I may go on next.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Thanks. I think brilliantly put. So I had the good fortune to meet Dr. Yunus in 2012, I think. Right? And that was when I was doing my master's at Tsinghua University in Beijing. And he was invited there as a guest speaker. So very impressed and inspired with what Dr. Yunus has done in terms of elevating poverty through microfinance. So personally, it's also my belief that poverty, right? The saying that give a fish, feed a day, teach the fish, feed for life. But I don't think that's enough, because in the course of my interaction, I've come to realize that feeding for life doesn't mean a person is able to get out of poverty, right? Case in point, very quickly. So during my time in China, I got to know of this case where there was this huge case where a lot of people were infected with AIDS or HIV because they were selling their blood, right? That was in the mid-90s, right? The blood economy. It was also known as the blood economy. I mean, this is already out in the news and all. So, yeah. So what happened was, in the mid-90s, a lot of pharmaceuticals went to China to buy blood, and a lot of villages sold their blood, but there were not enough hospitals to officiate the proper transaction. So underground stations sprouted, and these underground stations, they just reused strangers. Whatever could go wrong went wrong, and that was why the AIDS epidemic spread rampantly in this part of China, right, Zhengzhou, Henan. So when I went. So my thesis research was on this. I went with the founder of the organization, Chi Heng Foundation, CHF, and I went down there and I went and interviewed the villagers and why did they do that, right? So the key point was poverty. They could survive. They had a small field, they had a job, but they just did not have enough, right? They like a meal to them was probably just rice and a plate of vegetables, and they had to last them throughout the day for the whole family. So I understand you, Dr. Faiz, when you mentioned that, it's this particular group of people, right? And probably in Singapore, I cannot compare because it's different kind. When I say the Singaporeans who are poor, it's a different kind of level, right? There's extreme poverty where you don't even have the basic to survive, and then there's another kind. So poverty, there are many levels, but I think what we are addressing here, when you talk about inclusive business, that to me is really a marketplace. So it's level 3, right? Give a fish, teach the fish. But at level 3, it's really about having a marketplace, an ecosystem where people can come to sell their things, sell the fish so that they can get out of poverty, right? I mean, fish being products, services, whatever it is. So it's about creating opportunities. And this brings me back to what Milton Friedman said, which I don't agree. So Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize economist, right? He mentioned that, I paraphrase him, that as long, and this was in the 1960s, right? Maximize the shareholders' equity. As long as you do that, it's okay within the law of a country. But if the country's law is not sophisticated, right, from like a developing world or versus a developed world country, then you cannot. So in a country, maybe there's no law to protect the waters because they're just not, then it's okay to exploit the people, to pollute the river because, well, there's no law about that. So that's wrong. right? So I think it's really down to our moral compass, what is right and what is wrong. And also the last part about the pie, right? I don't subscribe to the belief as well that, oh, it's I win, you lose, everybody else loses. No, I always believe in a win-win-win, right? Win for society, win for corporate, and win for and the world, right? And or environment. Okay, so that's one of the key things that and how to achieve that, right? I think one of the key ways is to start to look at creating opportunities and equality versus equity, right? If you know the difference, equality is everybody has the same chances, which is not equal already. Because if I'm from, if somebody's from a well-to-do family, then this person will have will have more equality, right? Because in terms of the chances. So equity is where, oh, sorry, if I was use this example, right? Imagine there's a fence and there's a soccer match, and there are 3 boys who want to see this soccer match. And these 3 boys, one of them is tall, so he doesn't need, so, right? And then he can just tiptoe and watch. The second is where this other boy, he can stand on a crate, a chair, and he can look over it. And the last boy, he doesn't have the crate and he's not tall enough, so he can't see, right? So that is equality. Everybody has the same chances, right? The fence is there, it blocks, and then there's a what do you call, there's a chair, right? So equity is when, okay, the tall boy puts the short boy on his shoulder and then they can watch it. So all 3 can watch. That is equity, where we try to use what resources we have and come up and customize the chances. We have to customize. So that's why some laws, they say, oh, income law, everybody is taxed the same. That helps with equality. I think in the past, when a lot of people are poor, right, with the same standard of, then it works, right? Like meritocracy, it works in that sense. But now there is such a great disparity. Different things have to be done to match, so that this will be done to close the gap. So that's me. Right. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you very much, Max.
Yep. Okay. I should avoid the last. For me, just let me briefly introduce just one of policy in Korea, which are creating many opportunities for vulnerable people. In Korea, for businesses that employ people with disabilities or the vulnerable people, the government gave subsidies. Meanwhile, 100 the companies which are hiring over 100 employees are having obligations to hire people with disabilities. Otherwise, they are fined by governments. That is very strong role for the businesses. So businesses may also be exempt from hiring obligations when hiring people with disabilities or purchasing products or services from companies that are hiring people with disabilities. So in this way, the government is promoting the employment in vulnerable groups. In other words, companies are either directly hiring the vulnerable groups, such as disabled, paying additional taxes, or doing businesses with the companies that employ disabled people. So we think with this approach, the vulnerable people can gain the economic opportunities as a supplier or manufacturer. In addition, the customers can also access the products that pursue the values. So even in our portfolio companies, several companies are using this policy to work with the Samsung or Naver, like the multinational companies. So they are hiring over 20 or 30 on developmental disorder the people. So that is the usually happening in Korea in the inclusive businesses sector.
Okay, thank you everyone for the really great opinions. I feel that if we continue this discussion, we are almost going to rewrite a new business book, a new MBA curriculum. Dr. Faiz is laughing because probably that's what's in AIT. Sorry, you're muted.
You brought a smile to my face because we already have in advanced stages of development something called the Yunus Global Masters in Social Business and Entrepreneurship. And the curriculum for that is actually designed to respond to the new normal. So I'm glad you mentioned it, and I get this opportunity to plug the program.
To plug
Thanks
in.
a lot.
Well, definitely, I'm sure. I mean, a lot of people in Vietnam would love to get in touch with some of this, because I think we're talking about new ways of looking at competition, new ways of HR. It's not about hiring just the best, most talented people, right? And then
That's right.
Russ was just mentioning
and I think
about new
there's going to be higher demand.
Yes, there is definitely. Everyone is. It's hot. It's hot these days, and which just leads me to my third question, because there's this opinion that impact enterprises, social entrepreneurship is hard, it's challenging, because entrepreneurship business itself is already tough, right? And then now you're adding on this, wow, new ways of looking at competition. Oh, wow, I have to hire even disabled people and put more effort into training them. So definitely the question about sustainability comes into most entrepreneurs' mind. And I'm sure everyone's asking this, like, so what makes or breaks enterprise, an impact business, from your observation of seeing so many people in this sector?
If I may jump in first, right? So I wear a few hats, one of which is at Quest. So the other one is I also run Social Collider, which is, I would like to think, Singapore's one and only co-working space for social enterprises. So within my community and network, I have about 30 plus social enterprises, right, that's housed within me. And, you know, so I think a lot of the pinpoints and what people do, right, and the things that make or break. I can't speak for all, but I think this is just a general trend. Number one, a lot of people, when they come into this impact business, they have a very good heart, right? They really want to help the community or the environment. But because of that, they don't look into how they can have a sustainable business. This is one of the key things that I look at, right? Because they will say, oh no, I want to help the employment, but then when it comes to business, probably they're not so good. So that's where I think business mentors, experienced founders who have done well, that's really good to connect and to tweak their way. Number one. Number two, a lot of times there are some government grants, there are some and impact investment. A lot of time probably won't look at them at this juncture because it is a little bit too small in terms of scaling. So nonetheless, I find that a lot of the at least the startups, the social enterprises, they, other than the business, they also gun for grants and or funds, right? So they're not focused. They're splitting their focus into doing the three things, or at least the two, right? Running business should be concurrent, but because we are also very lean, so there's a lot of time not enough manpower. And I've seen many cases where they gun for grants, and then when they don't get it, they die. They literally die. They just like, oh, I don't have enough grants, I cannot survive, right? So to me, you should be very focused and just go in and scale. Just make sure your business model is working. Make sure you're earning money, a revenue, right? Then people will be more interested to look at you and talk. It's just like any other kind of startup, right? Because as much as I think impact investors look at the returns, maybe the double or even triple bottom line, a lot of times it's still back to the basics. That is, are you sustainable, right? Or are you just relying on grants after grants? Because there's only so much grant to go, right? So that's one of the key things that I feel as an impact business you should. And if you look into hiring, right, like what Max mentioned earlier, in Singapore we do not have a law right? Unfortunately. Okay, I think that's a brilliant thing because just to sidetrack in my previous work with an MMC, right? I push out a law, policy in China to hire people with disabilities. So from less than 10, now they have about 400. But why, right? Because in China, there's a law that 1.5% of the staff needs to come from this community. And if not, so the company was paying about $5 million of taxes every year. To me, it's a no-brainer. Why didn't you do it, right? I mean, there were a lot of other reasons we're not going to. So coming back to my point then, if the impact is through hiring, if you scale your business, you're increasing your hiring of the underserved community. And isn't that concurrent? So, so coming back then, just two things. Number one, be very focused business, right? Grow your business and your impact should be concurrent, right? Your impact. Number two, are you chasing grants, funds, or business, right? As at this particular stage, unless you have a strong team, you can, probably delegate. Otherwise, I think you should just try to gun for business first, right? The grant and all, I think, will come into place at a later date if you have proven your business model. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Russ.
Let me the second. Yeah.
This one will be the last one.
I believe that the most desirable social impact model is one where business grows and the growth of impact are not be built separately. To do that, I am recommending to social entrepreneurs to create a business at the point where customers and beneficiaries are overlapped. However, as investors and accelerator, there are times when there is no association between the business model and the impact model. So I think the impact business model or impact business that invest is the business profit into social enterprises that are unrelated to their business may seem to work well in the short run, but in the long run, it can seriously constrain the sustainability of a business. So having separate value chains for the business model and the impact model is like running two different businesses. Therefore, I am enthusiastic about business model that naturally create social value in the process of generating the profit. So in my company defines the essential of the social businesses model that is developed through acceleration as the social value and profit alignment. So we called it SPA. In other words, it built a solution for social businesses on a balance point where profit and the social value interest. So this alignment is an ongoing process of locating balance point at the very depending on the social problem and the market situation and market conditions to create a business model. So the last but not least, if social businesses should satisfy the customers and beneficiaries separately, it will cost a lot. So I think the good impact business is trying to meet customers and beneficiaries at the one point. Yep. That is my idea.
Thank you. Doctor?
My turn, I would say.
Yes.
These are all wonderful points. I think both Russ and Max have really pulled to very convincing cases for sustainability. But what I would say, I'd like to repeat what you two gentlemen have said in more plain and simple words. A business is only sustainable if it's profitable. And so that is the abiding principle of entrepreneurship. As long as you're able to turn a margin, and as long as you're able to remain solvent, there is hope for a business. But then, once you've figured out that making money is important, one must, as a businessman, it's also important to figure out how that money is to be made. So that brings us into the discussion on responsible business. So if a business is making a profit at the cost of the environment, or by stealing taxes, or underpaying, or putting workers at risk, or in some way compromising ethical trade principles, using ingredients that are harmful, or building a business story that is not factual, all these we know are bad for business in the marketplace. We already know. They don't have to have any social labeling, but the fact is these are anti-market businesses. And we know that a lot of the companies that have succeeded in enormous sort of volumes of business have ended up being challenged for their anti-social business practices. So for all the young entrepreneurs in this room, I'd like us to kind of remember that yes, making money is important because that is the definition of sustainability in enterprise. But how that money is made is also very, very important because it has direct impacts on society, on the environment, on government, on your neighbors and your children. So whatever you do, as long as you're making money, and then making that money in a socially responsible, environmentally responsible way, any business can be sustainable. That's the principle. But for sheer examples of this, what we do at the SDG lab at AIT and at the Yunus Thailand network is that we take the sustainable development goals as our source of inspiration. You know that all the 17 goals are basically development menus for the world. These are significant challenges that we have to fix if we have to give the world a better sense of well-being. So one good way for young entrepreneurs to approach creating social businesses is to take inspiration from the Sustainable Development Goals. So if you go in and say, education, water and sanitation, gender equity, poverty. Now you think about that. And once you fix the challenge in your mind and let your creativity go into designing a business, chances are you'll come up with a business idea that will solve a particular social problem. And by creating that business, as you become profitable, the more benefit you will generate to society and to the environment. And that is the principle of social business, as Professor Yunus also talks about. And when he talks about this whole new campaign that we're launching, it's called No Going Back, is precisely this: that business is the only way known to society to create wealth. There is no other way, sadly. So we cannot say business is bad because that is the only way the world has arrived at the level of development that it has managed to arrive. It's not because of wars or conquests or bumper harvests or whatever. It's because there were people who were entrepreneurial and who had this mind on the margin. And the margin converted into taxes, the margin converted into personal wealth, and the margins converted into social benefits and charity and philanthropy. Think about it. So business cannot be lumped into all the bad things. It's how you do business that's important. So if you create a business that has at its core the desire to solve a social problem, you intersect what Max calls the profit and the social. And you design a business which intersects and where the profits solve problems, pay taxes, create jobs, but the business doesn't harm communities, doesn't harm society, doesn't pollute the environment, etc. And the good news is it's already possible. There are large companies like Danone, Bayer, Lay's, McCain's potato chips, Uniqlo, enormous examples we have of really fortune companies who are now either creating subsidiaries of social businesses or creating elements within the main businesses of integrating values and social business principles into their business models, and they're succeeding. So there is hope. So whether you do a technology, whether you create an application for a mobile phone, which helps farmers or mothers like they're doing in India, or you create products that solve certain problems like green fertilizers and so on, whatever you do, as long as the product makes money and the money is made responsibly and solves a problem, then it will become possible to do so. And the good thing is that as you are making money, you're not asking for government to deliver on the SDGs. You're not asking philanthropists to give donations to fix health and education and water. Your business is creating the wealth that will solve problems. Some of these will be at the small level, but when you scale up or when you integrate supplier value chains across the world, a new kind of globalization is possible. I could go on, but that's where I think the sustainability discussion becomes very interesting, but it also becomes very real as we go into the post-COVID way of doing things.
Well, thank you very much. I'm reminded that we actually only have 3 minutes left, but I would like to also ask the organizers whether we could actually slip in one more question. Could we extend this for 15 minutes? And also everyone else, tummies, especially those waiting for, lunch time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, because after this is a lunch break.
Okay,
so yes, please go
perfect.
ahead with the last question.
Perfect. Yes, I'm just thinking to do some magic here because we do have one last question. At the same time, there are actually quite a few questions from the floor. And I'm going to try and blend everything together. So basically, actually, most of the questions from the floor is something very today. It's about like COVID challenges, about hiring, about like if I need to attract international talent at this time, but people can't travel. So how can I do that? So it's a lot of challenges and barriers right now that I guess some of the entrepreneurs right now out there here in the participant are facing day to day operating their impact business. So perhaps the question to the panelists would be, like in this state of restrictions, barriers, and lack of resources, I would say, perhaps you have some tips and advice for entrepreneurs of how they could actually turn things around or look at the situation differently. How could they find resources when there is, lack of resources? Perhaps you could also give example of a business that you've seen has, pivoted or just changed the direction differently during COVID to survive, to thrive, and even thrive, I mean. I guess it will also help inspire thinking among these young entrepreneurs. Anyone wants to go first? Maybe Max. He's smiling and laughing a lot. Sorry, you're mute, I think.
Well, in that case, I should jump in then.
Oh. Okay.
Thanks, Max. No, I think some of the examples are a continuation of what I mentioned to you. COVID has created opportunities, enormous opportunities for some people. And I'm not talking about tech people and the pharmaceutical industry people and all the people who've been in the logistics business that have been sort of boosted by this crisis. In Thailand, for instance, CP, one of our most respected companies here, has just launched this huge mask making factory. Very quickly, they set it up and it's producing masks. So yes, there have been companies who have taken advantage, but there are also companies who have put their profits to work for communities and so on. I'm not talking about those, but my example comes from your Grab or Uber drivers. When all of us were locked down, the home delivery industry, really in Thailand at least, boomed. because we couldn't leave. We were all ordering online, and there was this rapid growth in the demand for motorcycle taxi drivers who were becoming delivery agents. And that, I see, has become a wonderfully involved business. And I was reading the story about how many people who had no experience of being taxi drivers or motorcycle couriers actually went out and started doing that while they were away from work. So that's just a micro example of how need determines demand, and demand then generates creativity in business. So agile business principles at work. The other thing that I saw was that a lot of the people who, in Thailand at least, are associated with two major industries. One is hospitality and tourism, and the other is transportation and mobility. Both suffered. And some of these guys branched out into delivery and logistics. And some hotels gave their places for quarantine centers to the government, and so on. So what I'm saying is that when there is an ability to improvise, and when there is a resourcefulness at play, which is the hallmark of the entrepreneur, some of the problems that other people are seeing become opportunities for you. So there could be other examples, but I was just trying to say that this is how opportunity basically rises from crisis. And finally, from sustainability and a social impact perspective, none of these examples that I've given you are irreversible. So the guys that left office jobs to become motorcycle couriers, when offices do open, can go back to their offices. But if the offices don't open, they might be, if they're smart enough, they might be using their mobility skills for something else. So having a resident reservoir of resourcefulness is the magic word when it comes to changing over and making the best of what you have.
Right. So if I were to add on Dr. Faiz, right, I think one of the key things that I have observed is probably that of, I think one of the key things that you need to understand, I've observed is that in order to survive, right, it's more than just being resourceful, but the overarching or the underlying principle is really about solving issues and monetizing. So if you go along that mindset, if you go along that focus, then I think it can't go wrong, right? What do I mean by that? Solving issue in society and monetizing it. So earlier, like what Dr. Faiz used the example, there was a need for logistics, right? There was a need for people to deliver things, deliver food, right? So the issue here is there is a need for that, right? So now I think right now we are in survival mode, right? So probably if you can pivot the business in terms of solving issues, right? And what are these immediate issues? If you can identify that, then of course come up with a solution to meet that, then I think that's a viable business option already, right? Case in point, so one of my friends, his family runs a cake making factory, right? A cake making factory in Singapore, and then of course during the COVID they were very badly hit. So then what happens, right? What can he do, right? So so he was thinking very hard, and he tried to pivot that, and so in the end, from that he actually very quickly, because he's an engineer, and he quickly made it into like a mask and glove making factory. Of course, then he had to import. There was a time lag, but within the first 2 weeks, he was able to set it up. And because the process flow, I mean, according to him, the supply chain process flow is very similar. So he just replicated that. So instead of making cakes now, he made it into a glove and mask making industry. But of course, the volume is not huge, but he was able to survive, right? He was able to do well, actually, right? Do well because there's such a huge demand, and he's supplying to not just local, but now looking into exporting. But of course, now with the stabilizing of the COVID, I think he's slowly getting back to the cake business. But always, what are your strengths, and what are the opportunities, right? What are the, so I always go in terms of that, right? Strength and then meeting the needs of the society at this particular juncture. And I think that will fall into the resources, because if you have that as a guiding angle, your resources will somehow come into play, because your strength is your resource, right? It's your key resource. Okay, so that's it from me. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay. To be honest, I don't know. Yeah. My portfolio companies all responding differently. It is an opportunity for some company, and at the same time, a crisis for several companies. However, collaborating remotely and keeping business moving forward has never been more important than ever. So we are seeing strong interest in many areas about the technology. But if your business is not related technologies, I'm sorry, I had no choice but to tell the original story. As a serial entrepreneur, I started my first impact business about 15 years ago. And coincidentally, it was the starting time of impact business in Korea. I have established 3 different social businesses in Korea and now work as an impact investor. As a serial entrepreneur, there was always a crisis. You have no choice but to create opportunities in crisis. Viruses are swallowing all values. Safety will be the most important value in the future. And we are facing most strong government now, and it will be existing. In Korea, it took over 10 years to let people considering the basic income as one of alternative against the social problems. But just in 2 months, the Korea government gave a basic disaster income for all Korean people. So I can advise you, just don't give up. If you don't give up, I think you already achieved half a success of your goal. So just be more pride of your doings, and please be resilient than ever. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know, honestly.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks. Yeah, very authentic answer.
Yeah. So I just want to jump in quickly. I sent a link, an article that I found to resonate what I've mentioned, and also probably what Max and Dr. Faiz have mentioned. Right, your greatest resource is really yourself. Your greatest asset is yourself. Right. So to use that as the benchmark, to springboard, or to jumpstart, or together, right, consolidate your resources now instead of looking to expand. Probably it's one of the best times to re-strategize as well as you move forward. Right, I'm mindful of time, so back to you.
Great. Okay, I guess we do have to wrap up, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think if I may conclude, I think this is such a big reminder for myself also, as someone who's a change maker in this world, that COVID or no COVID, virus or not, problems already exist in this world. It already exists out there. We know it's there. We know there's a lot of work to do to make this world a much more beautiful place for everyone. And entrepreneurship is probably one of the most powerful tools in this 21st century. It unleashes so much innate strength, creativity, and hopefully in this new decade also humanity in all of us. And it's basically the new warrior of the heart in this 21st century. We are all warriors with heart. Like, you cannot have one without the other, I think very much. And 10 years in Vietnam, I can say, and this, sorry to chip this in, but I'm also helping to promote Vietnam because the ecosystem definitely need you guys here to constantly, help give out knowledge or disseminate, any know-hows. But 10 years here in Vietnam, I could really say that this has been one of the most resilient, most resourceful community that I've worked in. I mean, this is the only country that has won a war and protect itself with sticks and stones. So I hope that everyone has gained a lot of perspective, insights, and especially energy from this discussion. And yeah, have a very good weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for the very fruitful discussions.
Thank you.